Hello and welcome to the webinar, The Next Frontier of Flavor Innovation from Molecule to Market. My name is Harini Venkatraman. I'm an Associate Research Director here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today is my colleague, Elna Shabani, analyst here at Lux. Throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the box that you see on your screen. Time permitting, we'll answer all the questions that we can. If your question doesn't get answered, please don't hesitate to send us an email to questions@luxresearchinc.com, and we'll make sure to respond immediately. Also, another note, if at any point you experience technical difficulties, such as frozen screens, simply refresh your browser and check that your internet connection is strong. All right, now let's get right into the discussion here. Elnis, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. Today I'll be walking you through what we see as the next frontier of flavor innovation and some of the major shifts shaping how flavors are discovered, developed, and brought to market. We'll explore the technologies driving these changes, look at a few examples from across the industry, and then a step back to discuss what it means for the future of flavor innovation. With that, let's dive in. I want to start with a quick example. In food and bev innovation, even very experienced companies, they launch products that don't always land the way they kind of hoped. And that's just part of trying new things, right? A few years ago, PepsiCo introduced Driftwell, a relaxation water meant to help people unwind. It moved pretty quickly from concept to shelf, backed by a strong consumer trend and also very solid science. But about a year and a half later, the product disappeared. When you look at consumer feedback, two things show up again and again. People didn't love the taste, and many didn't really feel the relaxation benefit the product promised. In other words, both the functional experience and the flavor fell short of expectations. And that's an important reminder. Of course, function matters too. If consumers don't feel the benefit, that's a problem. But even when the science is there, if the flavor experience doesn't work, the product usually doesn't either. So flavor isn't just the final touch. It kind of shapes perception, it helps deliver the experience, and ultimately that's why one of the reasons that drives repeat purchase. So if we are kind of talking about the future of food and bev innovation, flavor can't be an afterthought. It has to be part of the strategy from the beginning. So here's the agenda for today. First, we'll take a step back and look at how flavor innovation actually happens across the workflow. Second, we'll explore some of the technologies that are shaping different stages from discovery to production, formulation, and validation. And finally, we'll close with a kind of a forward-looking view on the opportunities and the strategic implications for companies working in this space. Let's start by reframing the workflow itself. Before we talk about technology, I want to ground this in what companies are actually saying. Across beverage, tobacco, and confectionery, very different industries, we are hearing very similar challenges from some of our clients as well. It's hard to keep up with fast, changing flavor trends. It's difficult to create differentiated sensory experience. And it's also increasingly challenging to mask bitterness or harshness while keeping labels clean and costs under control. So what's interesting is that these aren't just formulation problems. They are kind of system problems. And when we say system or flavor system, we mean the whole set of elements that shape the sensory experience. It's ingredients, either it's structure, it's delivery, and how flavor is actually perceived in the mouth. All of these is considered flavor system. So take something very simple like salt reduction. In the past, the solution might have been to replace salt with new ingredients or add more additives to compensate. But today, companies might change the structure of salt crystals, or they try to adjust formulation or modify how flavor is released in the mouth, and um, all to kind of maintain the same perception and at the same time less sodium. Sometimes it works. And that's why companies aren't just trying to create new flavors. They are trying to discover them faster, validate them earlier, scale them more efficiently, and connect them to real consumer demand. So the issue isn't creativity, it's capability. And that's what leads us to rethink how the flavor innovation process actually works. Traditionally, flavor innovation has been viewed as a linear pipeline. You start with discovery, then production, formulation, testing, and validation, and finally, consumer engagement. But in reality, it doesn't work like that. Consumer feedback can influence formulation early. Formulation constraints can affect what you pursue in discovery stage. Production scalability might shape what actually reaches the market. So as you can see, it's not a straight line. It's kind of a feedback loop. And that shift from a linear pipeline to a circular interconnected system is critical because once you start seeing it like a system, improving just one stage will not be enough. You have to enable the connection between these stages, and that's where the real innovation opportunity lies. If flavor innovation is becoming more interconnected as we introduce, we should see that reflected in industry activity as well, right? And we actually do. For example, Nielsen Q's acquisition of Gastrograph shows how predictive sensory modeling is becoming a strategic capability. And on the production side, partnerships like Lalament and Evodia Bio are using fermentation platforms to produce aroma ingredients from more reliable sources and at the same time more identical to nature, unlike some chemical synthesis processes. So the takeaway is simple: innovation isn't happening in just one place; it's happening across the flavor ecosystem. So if innovation is happening across every stage of this loop and increasingly connecting those stages, the real question really becomes where does flavor innovation truly happen in your workflow? Not just do you have a strong flavorist, but are your discovery tools connected to consumer insight? Is your formulation team informed by production capabilities and scalability early enough? Or are you using predictive tools to reduce iteration cycles? Because in a circular system, bottlenecks don't sit in just one place. They kind of ripple, right? And the companies pulling ahead aren't just investing in individual technologies, they are building integrated capabilities across the workflow. That's the mindset shifts we're going to build on in the next section when we look at the enabling technologies making this possible. We've seen the signals shaping flavor innovation. Now let's really look at where those shifts are actually happening across each stage of the flavor life cycle. If you look at this tech signal, which is a tool we developed here at Lux Research, showing innovation momentum for certain technologies, considering the patent publication activities, VC investment that goes toward the technology. If we look at this tech signal, we notice that interest in flavor-related technologies has been steadily rising over the past decade, and not just a short-term spike. From that growth, and the trend we see in patents and papers, three shifts really stand out. For example, when we look at papers and patent trends in our tech signal, we see flavor is becoming a system science, integrating chemistry, biology, data, and sensory science rather than, treating flavor as a standalone formulation step. Second, discovery is becoming more predictive. companies are increasingly trying to anticipate consumer preferences instead of reacting to them. And third, when we look at VC investment data, now Lux Tech Signal, we see biotech enabled approaches such as fermentation or biomanufacturing, other types of biomanufacturing are gaining momentum as kind of new routes to natural flavor production. So together, this shift shows that flavor innovation is becoming more integrated, more data-driven, and also kind of technology-enabled. So if flavor is becoming more tech-driven and more system-based, the obvious question is who's actually driving that kind of change? Right now, the big flavor houses still lead the space. Companies like Givaudan, IFF, DSM, they're still at the center, especially when it comes to synthetic and legacy flavor systems. But what's different is the growing wave of startups and biotech, players pushing into more natural and fermentation enabled flavors. So this overall isn't a story of disruption replacing, incumbents. It's more a story of, I would say, evolution. We already walked through the flavor innovation life cycle earlier, and now the question is what technologies are actually reshaping each stage. So let's take a look at the technologies enabling them, and we'll start very upstream with how flavors are discovered in the first place. So, and this is where we're seeing a lot of major shifts. Traditionally, flavor discovery relied heavily on human expertise and trial and error. Now we're seeing AI-driven design platforms that can scan large data sets to suggest new flavor combinations before they even reach the lab. At the same time, molecular and receptor-based approaches are helping companies understand why something tastes the way it does, not just whether it tastes good or not. And advanced analytical tools like metabolomic mapping, they allow much deeper profiling of flavor compounds. So discovery is moving from intuition-led exploration to more kind of data-informed design. A good example of this shift is Olem Food Ingredient. They use predictive AI to scan online recipes, restaurant menus, and e-commerce data to kind of spot cacao flavor trends very early on. One insight they found was an East meets West crossover, where Western consumers exploring flavors like sesame and dragon fruit, while Eastern market lean into more salted caramel and marshmallow notes. So instead of waiting for trends to appear in the sales data, companies can start anticipating them. And at the same time, AI is only as good as the data behind it. Just wanted to make that note that not every single, signal can turn into a sort of lasting flavor opportunity. So that's with discovery. The next shift is in production and how flavors are actually made. One big change is the rise of precision fermentation, where companies use microbes to produce specific flavor molecules. We're also seeing enzymatic processes that convert raw materials into, high-value flavor compounds more efficiently. So overall, flavor production is becoming more biological, more controlled, and in some cases even more sustainable in terms of resource efficiency and resource, I would say, consistency. Uh, One company working in this direction is Kai Botanic. They're developing plant cell culture systems from vanilla planifolia to produce vanillin and related compounds, essentially growing vanilla flavors in controlled bioreactors rather than relying on traditional extraction from the actual plant. This work is still in early stages and it's supported by USDA phase one grant, but it kind of points to where the industry may be heading. From a Lux perspective, it highlights the growing interest in bio-based routes to natural flavors. And at the same time, must mention that technologies like plant cell culture still need to prove that they can scale economically. Once flavors are produced, the next question is how do you make them work in real products? That's where formulation technologies comes in. We're seeing more focus on flavor modulation, reducing sugar, making masking bitterness or enhancing specific taste notes without adding more additives, ingredients. Encapsulation systems are also improving, helping control release and stabilize flavors. There is also growing interest in multisensory actives, things like cooling or tingling that create a more immersive experience. And increasingly, AI is being used here too, helping teams optimize formulations faster. So formulation is no longer just, about blending. It's becoming a much more engineered step. One example of advanced formulation comes from this company, Takasaka's multi-sensate system. Instead of focusing only on taste, it combines cooling, warming, and tingling agents to create both immediate and longer lasting sensations. What's interesting is the balance here, not just increasing intensity, but moderating harsh notes and creating a smoother sensory experience. This reflects the broader shift we've been discussing. Flavor is no longer just, chemistry. It's a multi-sensory kind of design. And trigeminal modulation is becoming an important tool to kind of differentiate products beyond, typical sweetness or aroma alone. And finally, none of these really matters if you can't measure it. Testing and validation are also becoming more tech enabled. Digital sensory tools like eNose and eTongue, excuse me, aim to quantify taste and aroma more objectively to reduce reliance on, human panels alone. E-noses are generally more advanced, but overall, these technologies are still developing and not yet widely, adopted in a commercial scale. At the same time, AI and data platforms are also being used to kind of connect sensory results with formulation data, speeding up the iteration cycle, as we mentioned. Technically, there is one more stage around consumer engagement here in our um, circular framework, but given the time today, we're not covering it in detail. If that's an area of interest, we'd be very happy to follow up and discuss it further after this session. One example of where testing is heading is the partnership between Flavor Active and Alphamas. They're combining eNose analytical technology with trained human sensory panels, integrating hardware, software, and human expertise rather than replacing people. The eNose analyzes volatile compounds, while the other partner, Flavor Active, provides the calibration kits, trained panels, and data interpretation. So what's interesting here is actually the hybrid model. It shows that digital sensory tools like eNose here, they still rely on human calibration and the structured data. So we're moving toward more objectively AI, kind of supported sensory evaluation, but wider adoption will depend on improvements in sensitivity of these sensors, consistency, and also their cost. And this reinforces the kind of bigger story here. Flavor innovation is becoming a very connected and data-enabled system across all stages that we discussed so far. So we've explored how flavor innovation works across the life cycle and seen the technologies driving it. Now let's step back and ask, where is this all heading? So to bring everything together, we mapped the technologies we discussed using a simple framework with two dimensions: innovation leverage and integration friction. By innovation leverage, we mean how much a technology expands what companies can actually do in flavor innovation, whether it unlocks new ingredients, new sensory experiences, or just new ways to design flavors. And integration friction refers to how difficult it is for companies to adopt that specific technology. Things like, infrastructure changes, new capabilities, regulatory hurdles, or the need to rethink part of the, workflow. When we map technologies across those two dimensions, four strategic roles start to emerge. In the top left, we have what we call foundational enablers. These technologies create a strong impact, but integrate relatively easily into the existing flavor development workflow. Things like, for example, flavor modulation or AI-led formulation, they fall here in this category because they directly enhance the formulation stage of the cycle while connecting better with, upstream discovery in the in and kind of the data and downstream sensory validation. They strengthen the system without fundamentally changing its structure. In the top right, we see the frontier enablers. These include technologies like precision fermentation, receptor based discovery. These technologies have very high leverage because they expand the discovery and production layers of the system. They enable kind of entirely new flavor molecules or new biological production routes and very deep understanding of taste mechanisms. But they also require greater integration effort, whether in biotech infrastructure, data capabilities, or regulatory pathways. In the bottom left, we have supporting tools, technologies like metabolomic mapping, encapsulation systems, multisensory actives, they all fall into this category. These tools strengthen the individual stages of the innovation cycle, whether it be discovery, formulation, or validation, and they help connect data between them. But their own, they really don't, fundamentally change what companies can produce. They mostly improve efficiency or precision or, performance. And finally, in the bottom right, we see technologies that currently have, low strategic fit, such as digital sensory devices like e-tongues and e-noses. These are promising for the testing and validation stage, but today they still face limitations around sensitivity, reliability, and integration with real sensory perception. So the friction of adopting them is still relatively high compared with the value they can deliver today. So this framework isn't about, labeling technologies as good or bad. Instead, it kind of helps companies think about how different technologies can strengthen different parts of the flavor innovation system and where the biggest strategic leverage might actually be. So, to close, there are three big shifts defining the next era of flavor innovation. First, flavor innovation is no longer a linear process. It's becoming a connected ecosystem where biotech, data science, and sensory design reinforce each other. That connectivity is what's enabling faster cycles and more predictive product development. Second, biotechnology, especially precision fermentation, it is reshaping production. It allows natural ingredients to be produced with greater consistency and reliability, but a scale up, costs, and operational complexity still need to be solved before it becomes, mainstream. And lastly, AI-powered sensory analytics and predictive modeling are changing how brands understand taste perception instead of reacting to trends. And companies can kind of, increasingly anticipate and design for that sensory, specific sensory outcome. And taking all of these together, the companies that will lead in flavor innovation, they won't just adopt new tools, they'll kind of rethink how discovery, production, and sensory insight might work together as one integrated system. And that's the end of this session. Thank you all for listening. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Elnas. We'll now be taking questions that you may have on the presentation, which you can type into the questions box. Let me just take a look here. We have a couple of ones coming out. The first one is around, so if you were to give one practical recommendation to companies, whether they're working on flavor innovation or they're kind of food and beverage CPGs, where should they actually start investing? Because you brought up an interesting evolution of flavor innovation there, but what would be your recommendation to invest?
Well, that's a very great question. And actually, the framework we just looked at kind of helped to answer that question. If you remember that chart, the technologies, the quadrants, the technologies in the top left, which we call foundational enablers, they are often the best place for companies to kind of, start from. Things like flavor modulation or AI assisted formulation, they can, I would say, create a lot of, impact without requiring companies to completely redesign all of their R&D workflow. And what makes those technology powerful is that they sit kind of right in the middle of the flavor innovation system. If you remember that circular kind of life cycle we showed, they help to connect the discovery insights with sort of the formulation and sensory validation. So for many companies, the first step isn't necessarily chasing the most, disruptive technology. It's kind of making sure the different parts of the flavor workflow are kind of actually working together, And once those connections are stronger, then it kind of becomes much easier for them to adopt some of the frontier technologies that we talked about, like fermentation, precision fermentation, some of those symbio routes, or even receptor-based discovery tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely very interesting there. We do have one more question here. So when you think about these technologies and the dynamics it's creating, right? Do you think the technologies will change the role of traditional flavor houses? Do you think they can make flavor innovation more accessible to smaller companies, SMEs, which has been traditionally a pretty big challenge, right? So it's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. And I think the answer is probably both yes and no. On one hand, some of these tools, for example, like AI-driven discovery platforms or predictive sensory analytics, some of the tools we discussed, they can make early flavor exploration more, accessible for some of these smaller companies. They might be able to experiment with flavor ideas or identify trends before they even, engage with those big flavor houses. But at the same time, I would say the overall flavor innovation system is actually becoming more complex, just like what we discussed today. Producing, new molecules, scaling them, optimizing the formulations, validating the sensory performance. They all kind of require a lot of expertise and I would say infrastructure. And instead of just supplying flavor ingredients, these leading companies will likely, in the future, they will likely move toward more integrated capabilities and offerings. For example, they can connect discovery tools or formulation expertise, production technologies, or even offering some sensory insights. And in a way, that kind of fits exactly with what we talked about today. Flavor innovation is becoming less about individual ingredients, a single ingredient, and it's kind of more about managing and navigating the entire ecosystem of flavor technology.
Absolutely. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. However, please do make sure to send in your questions if you have any more, and happy to connect after this presentation. That pretty much concludes our webinar for today. The slide presentation and the recording will be sent to all the attendees through email. After leaving the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation, and we would appreciate any feedback that would help us inform and also improve our future webinars. So also take a moment and check some of our upcoming webinars on our Lux Research website. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great day. Thank you.